Hey there, welcome to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to be demonstrating how to create this unique navigation bar, which has some pretty cool animations. In order for this to be achieved, we're going to be using Next.js, which will be used to actually construct and build out the navigation bar, and also Framer Motion, which will allow us to create some really cool animations when we open and close the navigation. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. Awesome, so before we get into the video, I do have a link in the description which will take you to my website, and then from there you can actually get access to the GitHub repository if you want. So if you do feel stuck or if you need something to help you out, more than welcome to grab that. And yeah, without further ado, let's jump right into it. So the first thing we want to do is we want to open up the terminal here, and within the terminal we want to create our Next.js project. So before we do this, you must have Node and npm installed. Once you have that installed, we can get right into it. So what we want to type in is npx create next app. And within here, we want to give it a title. So let's call it unique navbar. Hit enter. And if successful, you should get a bunch of props that pop up. So for our first one, we're going to go yes. This one, we're going to go yes. No, yes, yes, and no. And what should happen now is it should start to install all of our files for us. And once that's done, we can get straight into it. Perfect. So once it's successfully installed, the next thing we want to do is to target the folder here. So in order to do that, type in cd and then type in the project name. So unique navbar. Hit enter, and now we are inside the folder, which is fantastic. The next part of the video is we want to install some packages. So the first one we want to install is SASS for the styling. So in order to do that, just type in npm install SASS. So SASS will be used to speed up the actual CSS styling. Once you've done that, the second one we're going to install is something called Framer Motion. So just in order to install that, just type in npm install Framer Motion. Framer Motion will be used for a lot of the navigations, particularly on the appearance when the navigation bar opens. And you'll see that towards the end of the video once we start to finalize and build it out. Perfect. So once you've got Framer Motion installed as well as SASS, we can now start our server up. And in order to start it up, what you want to type in is npm run dev. And what happens here is it will start the server. And as you can see, it has created a localhost 3000 file. And just give it 6 seconds and that should work. If we come back over to here, this is our local 3000 file. And if we hit reload, we should start to see the Next.js template appear. Yep, it's working. Fantastic. And now we can get right into building out the actual project. So the first thing we want to do is come over to our source folder. And under the source folder, we want to go directly into our page.tsx file here. Everything within the main div here, we want to delete. So just get rid of all of this. And another thing we want to delete is the image tag up here. What I might also do is get rid of this terminal so you guys can see it better. So once you've done that, the next thing we want to do is to come over to the globals.css file here. This basically controls all of the global styles. And just to make our lives easier, I want to manipulate the H1 and P tags just so the landing page is already organized. We don't have to worry about it. So what we want to do is for the H1 tag, let's give it a font size of something like, I don't know, 3 rem. And for the padding, just so we can make it responsive, let's give it a value of 0 for the top and bottom and 10 vertical width for the left and right. Save that. Just copy this and paste it underneath. But instead of doing H1, change it to a P tag, change the font size to 1 rem, and keep the padding the exact same. Awesome. And then once you've done that, we can come back into page.tsx and we can build out a very basic landing page. So underneath here, what we want to do is to create an empty div. Within the empty div, I want to give it a H1 tag and I want to call it welcome stranger. and we want to give it a p tag called click on that burger menu. Once you've done that, and to make sure everything's working, let's go back into our local host. We can now see it. However, I want to put this directly into the center. So in order to do that, what we can do is exit out of the globals.css file here. And we want to open up the page.module.css file. Everything underneath the .main we want to delete. So let's get rid of all of this stuff here. So let's delete that. And what we want to do is we want to set the justify content to center. The padding, we want to get rid of that. And that should work. So if we go back into our localhost file, we can now see our very basic landing page, which has our H1 tag as well as our P tag here. Awesome. So once you've built out the basic landing page, the next step is to actually create the navbar itself. So let's get right into it right now. What we want to do is we want to create a new folder and we want to call it components. Within the components folder, we want to create another folder called navbar. And within navbar, we want to create two files. So our first one is going to be called Navbar.tsx, which will be used for the structuring, the states, as well as the Framer Motion properties. And finally, we also want to create one called Navbar.module.SCSS, which will be used for the SASS of the styling for the navbar. Awesome. So once you've done that, what we want to type into here is RAFCE, hit enter. And what we want to do here is underneath our first line here, we want to import our styles. So let's grab that. And then after doing that, we want to import motion from Framer Motion. Since we're using Framer Motion and Usestate, we want to make sure that this file has a use client property, so it's not server-side rendering. Awesome. So the first thing we want to do is to build out the structure. So what we want to do is for the actual div of the navigation, we want to give it a class name called styles.navbar. Within here, we want to create a separate div called the navigation, which will be the burger menu as well as a call to action button. So in order to do that, we'll create another div, give it a class name called styles.navigation. Within navigation, we want to give a button to it with the class name of styles.button. And we're going to call it learn more. Once you have that button in, the next thing we want to add in is the burger menu container. So in order to do that, let's create another div, give it a class name of styles.burger menu container. And with burger menu container, what we want to do is give it two divs. So one is going to be called the styles.burger menu trigger. This will be used to actually fire the burger menu trigger. And then we also want another one called burger menu, which will be the actual styling part. Fantastic. So what we have is we have our top navigation section. And the next part we want to add in is the actual content that will appear and we'll be using Framer Motion for. So in order to do that, what we're going to do is to go underneath our styles.navigation div here. We want to add in a new one and give it a class name of styles.content. Within here, we're going to create a UL tag. You're going to give it an LI tag, an A tag. And since I'm not creating multiple pages, obviously you can do this in future projects. I'm just going to give it a slash to represent the home page. And underneath here, I'm going to give it a value. And underneath here, I'm going to give it a value of home. After this, I'm going to copy and paste this a few times like so. After home, I want to give it about. After that, let's give it something like portfolio and contact. Fantastic. So this is the basic structure of the static. So if we go into our local host, since it's not appearing, awesome. So this is the basic structure of the static. To make sure it's working, what we can do is actually go back into our page.tsx file here. And what we're going to do is we want to import that navbar component that we just created. And we'll do that right now. So let's grab the components, the navbar folder, and then also the navbar file. So underneath main, we want to grab that component, make it visible within our page.tsx file here. Let's save that. And if we go back into it, we should now see it. And we do. We can see that we have our button here as well as our list that we just created. Obviously, we don't have any burger menu because we haven't created it yet. Awesome. So once we've done that, the next thing we want to do is to start styling the tags that we just created here. So let's get right into that right now. So the first thing I'm going to grab is the navbar div here. And with this div, I'm going to set a display of flex, align items to flex start. So it is aligned to the left. And we also want to justify content to flex start as well. We want to give the width of the navigation itself 100%. So it spans the entire width of the viewport. We also want to give it a padding of 0 for the top and bottom and 10 vertical width for the left and right. So it's again responsive. We also want to give it a background color of black. So just give it #000. We also want to give it a height of 0. Let's give it a position of absolute since I want it to be moved freely. Let's set that value to 0. So it's directly at the top. We know exactly where it is. Let's give it a transition of 0.5 seconds. And we want to impact the height. So if we go back into our file here, everything, as you can see, is directly up here, and that's starting to look quite nice. Since we're using SASS, we can actually nest our styles within here, which is pretty cool. So I'm going to do that right now. So underneath the navbar, we want to target the actual navigation tool itself. With the navigation, let's give it a position again of absolute. Let's give it a value of 0 to the top. Let's give it some padding at the top. So maybe something like 5 rem. Let's give it a width of, let's create a calculation. So make it 100% minus the left and right padding. So that's 10 vertical width. So 10 times 2 is 20. So 20 vertical width. We also want to set display of flex, line items to center, and also justify content to space between. Awesome. Once we've worked on the navigation, the next thing we want to target is the actual button. So let's target that button. With the button, we want to give it a background color and make it transparent. Let's give it a border of none. Let's set the font size to something like 1 rem. Let's also set the cursor to pointer so the user knows they can actually click on it. Let's set the color to something like black, so 000. And since when it opens and closes, I want to toggle that black to white. So let's give it something like 0.5 seconds, targeting the color. This way we'll have a nice smooth transition between the opening and closing of the burger menu. Once we have done that, the next thing we want to target is the burger menu container. So let's do that right now. I'll just move this out so you guys can see it a bit better. So the burger menu container, what we want to do is we want to give it a content of blank so that we can start manipulating it. Let's give it a width of something like 55 pixels. The height, let's make it a bit short, so 25 pixels. Let's set the position to relative. Let's set the right value, so it's furthest to the right by 0. We also want to set a cursor of pointer as well. And just to make sure this is working, let's give it a background color of red. So what we'll do now is we'll go back into our file here. Fantastic. So what we have is we have our burger menu directly here. And we also have our learn more button. I think I should add a bit more padding here. So what I'm going to do is go back into our navigation here, and I'm going to give it a padding of something like 7 rem instead. Let's go back into it. Yep, that looks a lot better. So now we can directly see our burger menu here as well as our button here. Fantastic. After doing that, I'm just going to get rid of the background color like so. And after the burger menu container, we want to grab the burger menu trigger. And with the burger menu trigger, we want to give it a content of blank. The width, the exact same, so 55 pixels. The height set to 25 pixels. We want to set the position to relative. We want to set the right value to 0. We also want to give it a cursor of pointer, since this is what will be used to actually fire the burger menu. So once you've done that, we also want to give it a Z index, so it's overlapping the actual icon itself that we're going to create. So let's give it a Z index of something like 100, just so it's on top of everything. Fantastic. Once we've created the trigger, the next step is we're going to design the actual burger menu, which will be really cool. So what we can do is we can grab the burger menu class div here. So burger menu. So give it a content of blank so that we can manipulate it. Let's give it a background color of, we'll do black. And obviously when we open it, we want to change it to white, but I'll get into that later in the video. We want to give it a position of absolute. We want to give it a width of 55 pixels. Give it a height of 4 pixels. We want to give it a Z index of 0. So it's underneath the burger trigger. And then we also want to give it a top value with a calculation of 25 pixels divided by 2 minus 1.5 pixels. And then for the transition between the toggle on and off states, let's target something like 0.25 seconds to the width itself. Let's give it an ease in and out property. In addition, we want to give it a 0.5 seconds to the background color and give it an ease in and out value like so. So once you've done that, if we go back into our file here, we can now start to see the burger menu appearing. However, we want to create not just one stroke, but 3. In order to do that, what you can do is after the burger menu div here, we can target the after value of it. So let's just grab this, give it 2 colons and type in after. And for after, let's do the exact same thing. So content blank, background color of black. So 000, position of absolute. Let's give it a width of 55 pixels, a height of 4 pixels. This time we want to give it a transform and translate the Y value. So it's directly above the burger menu that we created. So by 10 pixels. We also want to give it a Z index of 0. So it's underneath the burger menu trigger. And then again, we want to copy this exact line here for the transition and save that. If we go back into our file, we can now see that we have 2 strokes here, which is starting to look really good. And then what we can do is we can copy this exactly as it is, paste it in here. And instead of doing after, let's change it to before. Save that. But this time, let's make it -10. So it goes in the opposite direction. And if we go back into it, we now have our burger menu, and that's starting to look really clean and really nice. Awesome. So once you've done that, I also want to give it a really cool hover effect. So in order to do that, let's target the burger menu trigger. Give it a hover effect. We also want to put in a wave dash so it directly impacts not the trigger, but the burger menu itself. So let's put in the burger menu and let's give it a width of 35 pixels. Save that. Let's go back into our file here. And if we come over to the burger menu, we have this really cool hover effect, and that's starting to look really nice. Fantastic. So once the hover effect is working, we now want to start manipulating the actual content here. As you can see, it's directly up here, but we want to make sure it's directly in the center when we open up the burger menu. So let's do that right now. So underneath here, let's target the burger menu class name. And with the content, let's give it a value of position absolute. Let's give it a top value of 30 vertical height. Let's give it a value of display none. But for this part of the video, I'm just going to comment this out. Just so we can see what it looks like as we build it out. So underneath here, we want to start manipulating the unordered list tag here. So just type in UL. With this UL, you'll notice we have some bullet points on it. So in order to get rid of that, let's go list style and set it to none. And then for the li tags, we want to increase the space between the top and bottom for each list item. So give it a padding of 1 rem to the top and bottom, 0 for the left and right. And then also we want to target the A tag. So let's give it a font size of something like 3 rem. So it's roughly the same size as what the H1 tags are. We also want to give it a color of RGB 127, 127, 127. So that this should give it a bit of a dark gray color, directly like this. Once we've done that, we also want to give it a transition. So when I open and close the burger menu value, I want to make sure the color is a smooth transition. So let's give it something like 0.25 seconds, contacting only the color. Let's save that. After doing that, we want to give it a hover effect when we open it up in the actual menu that we're going to create. So for the color, let's give it a very light color. So 232, 232, 232. And we also want to give it a transition. So the exact same. Perfect. So once you've done your a hover tag, let's go directly back into our file here. And we can see it's clearly working here. So this is a good sign. And what we can do, since this is the off state that we're working on, we can get rid of this, and we can go back into here, and now we can no longer see it. So this means it's working. Fantastic. Awesome. So once we've done that, the next stage is we want to create the on state. So when the burger menu is actually active. So in order to do that, come back into your Navbar.tsx file here. And what we want to do is create more curly brackets within Navbar here. Give it some backticks like so. Give it a $sign. And what we can do is we can start to add in multiple style tags. So let's add another $sign, curly brackets, copy this. Instead of calling it Navbar, we want to call it active. And what this will do is it will allow us to see what the active state looks like, and we can start manipulating it underneath here in the CSS. So let's do that right now. So with our SCSS file, not CSS, SCSS file, we're going to target the Navbar.active state, and we want to give it a background color of black. So hashtag 000. I'm going to give it a transition of 0.75 seconds to the height. And we want to give it a height value of 100 vertical height. If we go back into the file, you'll now see that the screen is completely black, which means it's working, which is really good. Let's go back into our file here. So once you've done that, we want to target the actual navigation bar at the top. So let's grab that. So the button itself, when it's on, I want to make sure the button is set to white instead of black so we can actually see it. So let's set the color to white. Let's set a transition of something like 0.5 seconds and targeting the color. So if we go back into here, we should now start to see it. This means it's working. This is starting to look really good. So once we've done that, we now want to target the burger menu container. So let's grab the burger menu container. And with the burger menu container, we want to target the burger menu. So the stroke in the middle of the burger menu, I want to give it a width of 0 so we can no longer see it. Give it a background color of white so when it transitions, we can see that transition. And we also want to give it a transition value of 0.25 seconds to the width, set it to ease in, out. And we also want to give it a 0.25 seconds value to the background color and give it a value of ease in, out. Save that. Fantastic. Once we've done the burger menu, we then want to target the burger menu after value. So with the after value, we want to give it a transform, and we want to translate the Y value back to 0 pixels. And we also want to rotate it by 135 degrees. So let's add that in now. Save that. After doing the 135 degree rotation and the transform or translate Y to 0 pixels, we should now start to see if that stroke is starting to appear. It's not. So that's because the width is set to 0. So if we get rid of that, go back into it, we can now start to see that stroke, and that means it's working. Fantastic. After doing that, we want to do the exact same thing, but this time change it to before. And instead of having a positive value of 135 degrees, we want to give it a negative value like so. We'll save that. Let's go back into it. And now we have our close value here. However, you may notice that we still have this hover effect. So in order to get rid of this, let's go back into here, go up to our burger menu trigger hover effect. So let's grab this. After this, we want to set the width value to 0 pixels. We go back into it. We go directly up and away from it. It's working the way that we want it to. And this is starting to look really good. Once you've done that, the final thing in our styling part of the video is to target the content value. So this value here. And with the content value, we want to give it a display of initial. So it is no longer display none. If we go back into it, we now have our values here. And if we highlight over them, we have this really cool hover effect. And that's starting to look really good. Just to make sure this is working, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this value here. So just delete that, go back into here. And we now have our close effect. And that's starting to look really, really cool. Awesome. So once you've done that, the next thing we're going to do is to start working with the use state values so we can start to toggle the actual burger menu so that we can fire it between an active and non-active state. So in order to do that, we first want to import the use state value. So just add that in like so. We are now importing it from React. So this is starting to look good. Once you've done that, the first thing we're going to create is a const with two values. So the first one is our burger menu active state. This determines what the actual active value is. And then we also want to set a second one called set burger menu active, which will be our function manipulating whatever this value is here. And for the sake of the video, let's give it a value of false. So what this basically means is that the burger menu active is currently set to false. But once this is set to true, we will allow for the active state to be added into our navbar here. And we'll start to do that very soon. So the next line of code we want to add in is a function, which will be used to toggle the burger menu's active state. In order to do that, let's create a new const with a function called toggle burger menu. Let's give it an arrow function. And within here, we want to grab the function within this line here. And what we're going to do is we want to toggle the false and true states whenever we click on the button. So in order to do that, just put in an exclamation mark and put in the value that we have here, which is burger menu active. Close that up. And there you go. We have our function, which will toggle the false and true values. And then we also have a line which defines what value the burger menu active value is. Perfect. Fantastic. So once we've created our use state function and statement here, we then want to come into the styles.navbar class name here, and we want to give it a conditional statement stating if the burger menu active is set to true, then we want to give it an active state. So set the styles to styles.active. Otherwise, we just want to give it a blank value. So it's just set to styles.navbar. Fantastic. Once we've done that, we then want to go into our burger menu trigger. And this is where we want this function to fire and for these active states to change. So in order to do that, after the class name, we want to give it an onClick value. And we want to give it a function itself. So let's give it some curly brackets. And with the function, we want to fire the toggle burger menu active function like so. Save that. And what should happen now is when I click on the burger menu container, this should change and these values should apply. So the false and true values should toggle between one another. So I've just inspected the page here, clicked on here, and you'll notice this value here, or sorry, here should change. So if I click on this, we now have this cool effect happening. That's starting to look really good. The one thing that I want to change is to have a smooth animation with the opening and close tag. So in order to do that, I'm going to go back into our code here. I'm going to go back into our navbar.module.scss file here. We're going to directly target the after and before values here. Instead of having width, let's change it to transform. Let's also change this to transform. Let's go back into our values here. Instead of doing width, change it to transform. Save that. We go back into here. We should now have this really cool effect, and that's starting to look really, really good. Awesome. For the next stage of this video, what we want to target and work with is Framer Motion, so we can start to create some really cool animations to the actual list items. So in order to do this, what we want to do is we want to create a parent Framer Motion effect. And then within the parent, we want to target a child effect so that each list tag changes depending on what level it's currently at. So for the parent motion tag, what we want to do is create a const called motion variance. We want to create a few properties. So the first one would be called open. So when it opens, I want to give it an opacity value of 1. I want to give it a transition of the following. I want to stagger the children, which would be the list items, by 0.1 second. I also want to give it an ease of something like ease out. And then I also want to give it a type of spring, just so it's a bit more interesting. So for the second property, we want to add in a closed effect. With this close effect, let's give it an opacity. Instead of giving it 1, I want to make sure that when I close the menu item, it's set to 0. I want to give it a transition of stagger children by 0 seconds. So as soon as I close it, it instantly goes back to its original state. I also want to make sure the duration is set to 0, just so when I close the menu, it goes back to how it was. So once you've done this, which is the parent effect, which we'll be applying to the UL tag, the next one we want to add in is our list items. So in order to do this, we do the exact same thing, but target the list item variants. So type in list item variants. So with this, we want to create 2 states, again, open and close. So for the open states, let's give it a Y value of 0. So it returns to its original location. Let's give it an opacity of 1. Let's give it a transition whereby the duration is set to 0.35 seconds. And we also want to give an ease of ease out. Save that. So once you've done that, the next one we want to work on is the closed state. So for closed, let's give it a Y value of 100. So it's below where we want it to be. So when we open up the menu item, I want the Y value to go from 100 to 0. I want to give the opacity to something like 0. So it starts at 0 and then ends at 1 when I open up the menu. And then for the transition, let's give it a duration of 0 seconds, just so when I close it, it goes back to 0, like so. Let's just add in a colon here. And there we have it. So we have our 2 variants, and what we can do now is go into our code here. And since we're using Framer Motion just for the UL tag and the list items, what we can do is type in motion dot our tag value, which is UL, do the exact same thing here. So we have our motion.ul tags here. To make it a bit more interesting, we want to make a conditional statement whether or not the burger menu trigger is on or off. So let's do that now. So in order for the animation to occur, so just type in animate equals. So if burger menu active is true, then we want to set the value to open, which is this one here. Otherwise, we want to set the value to closed. Save that. Want to give it another space, and this time we want to type in variance, and we need to target that to this value here that we just created called motion variance. So put that in there, save that. So once you've done the UL Framer Motion, the next thing we're going to add in is the motion effect to the list tags. So just type in motion.li. Do the exact same thing for the rest of them. So I'm just going to quickly do that now. And for each list item, we want to give it a variant. But instead of targeting the motion variants, we created the second one called the list item variants, which are the individual items we'll be working with. So let's add that in. And what we'll do now is copy and paste this to each individual line like so. Awesome. So once you've added in your variants for the parent tag, which is the UL, and for each individual list item here, you can now go back into our file here. And upon clicking on the burger menu, we should see this really cool animation, which we do. That looks amazing. And just to make sure it's working perfectly, we can actually inspect on each item here. And you'll notice the list item changes. So these properties change when I open and close the burger menu container. There you go. It runs exactly like so. And another really cool thing about this is it's completely responsive. So if I give it a smaller size, like a mobile template, for example, that works exactly like so. And that's starting to look really, really good. So yeah, that's basically the end of the video. I hope you guys enjoyed that. If you did learn something, please let me know, or if there's a specific topic in mind you'd like to learn or have me deep dive into, please let me know. I'd be more than happy to do so. And yeah, without further ado, I guess I will catch you guys in the next video. Catch you later.